answering the existing, responding to what already exists. That is the content of naked space. It's about use even of what we can call naked space. What happens to those spaces that do no longer serve their initial purpose? How can we restructure, reinvent them in order to reinvent them in general? We have spent more than 15 years in our offices in Zürich and in Chor, and whatever we do happens within an interdisciplinary team. We are architects, interior architects and scenarists. And we are talking precisely about this question, this concept between the old and the new, between what is private and what is public, and also between the changing needs. In everything we do, in all of our projects, materiality is playing an important role. We always talk about the people first, their needs, their behaviors, and their function within their space. But above all, we also question how the person feels within their space. What are they supposed to experience when they spend time in that space? And how can we generate or even direct this atmosphere that we aim for? When we do that, we usually analyze the existing space and their function in terms of their past. And its present as well. We try to be very detailed and we use all different sources available. And only once we've done that, we start the planning and the transformation within the existing structures into a new project. A first project that we would like to show you today was finished only a couple of months ago and is now used as a living space. We call that from barn to a living space. You know that kind of structures. We see it all over in Switzerland, mostly in the mountain spaces, but also sometimes in the middle land. Can you live in such a structure? Animals were able to, which is why those buildings were built initially. And now, most of the time, these barns have been empty for several tenths of years, really, decades, because law is no longer allowing for these spaces to be used for animals. You can see the structure of the village of Charantz, and on that structure you can't tell what is a living space or a house or what is a barn. If you look closely, you might be able to identify what the church is, because that will tell you already something about the basic structure of the village. But this kind of building type is always the same. Uses and most of the time we see minimal differences only. It's a minimal building in terms of its foundation, large openings which were mostly equipped with wooden coverings, and that would allow for enough air necessary in order to stock hay or whatever else needed for the sustention of the animals. And in the inside, all sorts of animals, whatever were kept there, pigs, cows. You can see it also here on the plan. It's marked in red. Here is what we did in terms of its transformation. You can tell the surrounding walls, the thick walls, particularly the existing structures. Here we have a small barn and a bigger barn. We left the access as it were, and also the large space in the middle, which was maintained as it was. It's very important for us to work with the building and not against the building. The desire that we often encounter, meaning making the space into a living space. We cannot start out by talking about a flat or an apartment. We need to start out by analyzing the building, and the new structures that we try to fit into the old structures follow the same pattern. We call it structuring. It's not a submission, it's a restructuring of the new structures within the old ones. You can also easily tell here, if you look at the plan, that we have not used all the space available. We only use 2 of the larger spaces. So these are now heated, so we're creating a warm space, but one of the larger spaces here is something that we call an in-between. It connects the 2 new rooms. You'll be able to see those afterwards on the pictures as well. But it means that if the inhabitants of one of the spaces wants to go into the other one, they walk through what we call a cold room. So they're back into the initial barn. The upper floor allows a connecting surface, which is where they used to stock hay or other foods for the animals, and it allows for a connecting structure, and that is different from the ground floor. You can also see it well here on the model of the ground floor. There's those 2 boxes which we have pre-created in order to illustrate it. So it was the initial structure which was then recreated, a structure that we built and fit into the existing structures, which allowed to maintain the initial structure, the initial building, and we worked with the barn walls, the existing walls. That's what I meant with working together and in a team. The newly created living space, here is the guest room, within this old structure where in the past the different animals found their living space. These 2 spaces can no longer be separated, and that's something that fascinates us when we work within those spaces, when we are able to connect the old structures and the new structures, and that means we're back into dialogue between the old and the new, which is something that adds to the story and to the history. That is our method, our approach, where we work very slowly. We don't use all of the space, all of the square meters that would be available, but we try to create an atmosphere by allowing for these spaces to continue existing. On the living room, on the upper floor, we can use the old barn doors, which are very large. They can be opened, and this is how this space can also become public or accessible from the outside. We have not created new openings or accesses. We used all the accesses and doors that were available and tried to integrate it. So a large opening, such as you can see it here, is something that we know from modern buildings. We use glass, you have a large view within the surroundings. And that, in that case, was only possible where there was the large opening of the barn. That's the only place where that's possible, and that's where we decided to use it. In all other openings, which allowed for light to come into the room, into that space, were also we also left them such as they were initially existing in their structures. So here is the in-between. This is where you move up from the ground floor to the upper floor with the stairs, which is kept very much in the same style than what was used in the initial structure, the initial building. Here is a view from the upper floor on the lower floor. We're still in what we call the cold space. Now obviously, so if you want to move from one room to the other, and you're moving at around -5 degrees Celsius. Here also you can tell the materialization of the stairs. We wanted it to be part of the existing structure, meaning the walls, which were sometimes treated in different ways, sometimes which were kept such as they were in the growth structure. Now that's one of the inner spaces. And that's the view from the outside. You can see the openings. We lit the lights on the inside. Now that building is used, and you can tell the typical barn doors two different entries. That's something that was part of the initial building and had its use. The goal was allowing for light while still protecting what was on the inside. And we use it in the same manner. On the outside, the transformation can hardly be told. But what is new is probably warmth and light. The atmosphere remains pretty much the same, but it's given a new life, and the patina remains in space as well. A completely different attitude. In this case, we have seen that it's quite radical. We really try to preserve what exists. We work with this building. But we opted for a different attitude in the case of another building. It's also a barn. It's the theater in Riom in Oberhalbstein. In this case, the windows were placed on the outside. You can also tell the wooden lamelles which were used in a decorative sense. And we tried to put this into a scenery because in this case, we tried consciously, while working with the people from the community, to create a sign. This is a theater. It should be accessible to everyone. It's something where you communicate, and we wanted the outside of that building to send out this message of a space of communication, of community, and the extra space that was created in the case of concerts, theater performances and other, were not submitted to reflections from the huge glass windows, which can sometimes be problematic because they throw back the sound waves. So by doing that, we have a natural filter thanks to the wooden wall that's been preserved. We kept asking ourselves how we could use the patina inside and outside, giving all the requests in terms of the new user. We wanted comfort, there's directives in terms of energy and in terms of preservation. And we managed to find a way by closing several eyes on how to use this building on a temporary level. We decided not to redecorate the walls, not to renew them, and by doing that, renouncing the use of plaster, we were able to respond to most of these requests. Moving back to the scene, those elements, tribune elements really, have been built by us. Maybe within the next 3 or 4 years they decide to get rid of these, and that will make for a large space which could be used differently again. You have to really watch in order to see the new ceiling. Here in that case, it was a double floor space, and we decided that we wanted to create an extra space by using the 2 floors from now on in order to use this foyer as such. So we used we had to create a new ceiling. The only cut surface within the existing patina is the place where the new ceiling is touching the existing walls. You see here a performance, dance performance. What is interesting here is that the performances are happening right in front of the public and the guests. So there's no real distance between the performance, the actors, and the public. They're separated by not even 2 meters. Yeah. 2 or 3 further bits of information in terms of the initial plan. Here is the barn, and next to it you find the farm building, which worked within that context. It made it possible for us that for all the accessory rooms such as kitchen, toilets and heating, we did not have to integrate these into the barn building. During our project and planning, we were planning for an underground level or even wanting to create an annex of that building. But then we decided, in agreement with the technicians and the specialists and the experts, that we could use the other building for these important spaces. Meaning, when there's a performance here on the right, and you have a break in the foyer, people would go to the toilet in the neighboring building and the kitchen would deliver into the foyer. So it's basically in the same way than this used to function in the past between the barn and the place where people used to live. Now we talk from the scene to yet another building. Here is a swimming pool that's no longer used. In Zürich, in the Engadin, one of the first swimming pools in Switzerland was built about a century ago, and about 30 years ago they decided to no longer use it for technical and hygienic reasons. I think it's similar in this case here. And it was decided to try different things. For example, they created a discotheque there because there was a school nearby, a boarding school. But then in the end they decided that they wanted a permanent theater. First of all, swimming pool. First swimming pool in Switzerland, built in 1912. It's obviously a protected building, a preserved building. And everything that we were going to do in terms of preservation had to be in respect of those requests. In order to build the scene, we opted for a wooden construct, which worked similar to pile dwellings used in the lakes in the past. So we tried to fix these within the pool, you know, where it goes deeper down. So this is the model of what we did. You can see a computer-generated model of the structure. So it's a wooden building between the different pillars, and they give the scenery its structure and uses the scene and the spaces for the seated guests. In this case, the tribune and the scene are closely linked. The visitors or the spectators goes around 3 sides, and the curtain is on a level that is right behind the spectators, meaning that when the curtain goes down, the spectator becomes part of the performance. Here is a picture while we were building it. You can tell the initial structure with the tiles and the glazed tiles, and how we built into that structure. Obviously, we had different interventions to make, some of them going deeper into the structure, which needed a lot of discussions and negotiation. But now there is place to room 200 spectators, which means nevertheless that access has to be secured and created. And in the case of the swimming pool and the structure and the neighboring cellar buildings, it wasn't possible. Also, the swimming pool had an internal access, whereas the theater needed an external access, which is why we had to do a major intervention in the initial and natural structure. Here is the finished theater in daylight. The curtains have been opened. What's the company called? Yeah, so they developed those chairs in order to find a solution with thanks to folding chairs, which would which would save a lot of space. It's been created by Egoman, a German company. They were developed in a similar way than the IMPS chairs. And it's the first time that they actually made this chair into a folding chair. And that is thanks to this theater. Different pictures taken behind the curtain. And here the new theater foyer with the counter. These were built in the former workshops of the school building. Here again you can tell the different functions, the different parts of the story. You can tell the different infrastructures, the house on top of it. You can tell where we put the lines in for electricity. And again, here a picture taken at a performance. I think it's Romeo and Juliet. This is on the scene, and behind it you can still see the glazed tiles of the swimming pool. Here is the entry, where you, on the other picture, you saw the huge hole. Here is the huge hole, sorry. Here is the entry with its little roof. Now we're going to stay in the same village, in the Engadine, and we're going to transform a living house into a museum. We always try to be as respectful as possible when facing the initial structure and living space. And we try to do the minimum in terms of the existing structure, but when the use changes, I think it's a good thing if it becomes visible. This house was built in 1951. And the type is very typical for the Engadine, for this region. This part of the house was directly connected to the barn. If you try to imagine this in terms of dimensions, it means that there's 6 floors. This is the plan of Zürich. Here is the theater, the Lyceum Alpinum in Zürich, and the Chiesa Gregory in the lower part of the village. Here again, the house and the barn, those were connected. Very important in that context, at this point, the garden, which had the same dimensions than the actual dwelling place. From the home to a museum, from a private house into a public space. From the home to the museum, a private building into a public building. This transformation makes certain interventions necessary, and some of them might be painful or might look painful. It needs different installations with stairs. It's supposed to function with lifts, and it obviously needs different annexes which necessitate a different technicity, which doesn't always exist. Here's different impressions from the entry part. The dimensions in this case cover 120 square meters. This is just the entry parts. It would be a 4-room flat. Different rooms. And here the barn structure. And here as well, there are dimensions in terms of the time, because time has left its traces on this building, and that's part of our work. We need to preserve and restore the existing structure. Here you can find a plan. I'm not going to talk about it in detail. I'm just going to mention this stair tower. We sacrificed consciously one of the rooms per floor in order to allow for the stairs. And in this room, I think we can open it a little more. This is per room per floor. It's roughly 22 square meters. So there is this stair tower, meaning we are funneling into the existing structure in order to create this sort of tower and open up for this stairs. It almost looks like one of the jumping towers used in the swimming pool. I think we need to wrap up. Here is different studies in terms of how this presents on the outside with the garden, with the new balcony which we had to replace. And I think in conclusion it's important to say the following. What is important in our daily work is the fact that we respond to what already exists. Not in order to get rid of it or suppress it, but in order to respect the place and its history, in order to continue being curious and to learn from what we see. And thanks to these dialogues, we find responses every day in our work. Thank you very much for your attention.